Uh, Good morning. Right, it was last at good morning. Right. So today we'll look into the topic of hegemony, right, developed by Antonio Gramsci. Right, one of the could be categorized as one of the most holistic uh, studies, right, or theory that was developed to understand the mass society, and also to understand how the powerful ones, the powerful elites, retain their power, right? But how the ideologies in societies have been disseminated so that they are co-opted or forced to believe and somehow contained, right, from resisting to the power that be in the society, right? We look into the apparatuses that have been developed, how Gramsci has developed this theory, right, during his incarceration period, right, under the Mussolini's period, right. Uh, uh, so basically, right, as a background, right, to the hegemony studies, right, it is said that it was most likely derived from the Greek word, right, which means leader, ruler, often in the sense of a state rather than its own, right. Since the 19th century, hegemony commonly has been used to indicate political predominance, usually of one state over another, right. This is the time where one country would go and rule another country through war by winning the war, winning over the state, right? So if you could also refer back to the Machiavelli's The Prince, right? You could see the traces, right, of hegemony over there, how to remain in power or how a leader could retain his power as a king, normally as a king, as a nobleman, and so on, right? So here, what we call Gramsci's idea of some hegemony is a leap from classical Marxism and also from as a response to Machiavelli's The Prince, right? So introduction of hegemony, right, by Gramsci, as I said, was an Italian communist thinker, right? He was a member of the Italian Communist Party. He was a journalist as well. He was writing for various party organs. One was Avanti, if I'm not mistaken, right? It was Avanti. And then he later formed the Italian Socialist Party, right? If I'm not mistaken. He was the Secretary General of the Italian Socialist Party, right? Being journalist in Italy, right? He had a very an unstable or poverty-ridden life in his younger days, right? He had also attempted suicide, right? He was living in isolation, right? He was a hunchback, right? He was born as a hunchback. Then he had a lot of problems, right? But it doesn't deter him or stop him from coming up with the theory of hegemony or profound socialist communist, right? In his which is still, his studies, his theory is very much relevant to the current context in discussing the role of media, in discussing the role of the institutions in society to retain the dominant ideology, right? Being journalist in Italy, right, regularly spoke at workers' studies circles on various topics. He was also involved in the internationalism movement, where the international socialists would congregate and discuss socialist ideas, right? The issues at hand, right? How to overthrow dictatorship or the old order of the society that discriminate and oppress the people. Right. So the French and Italian Revolution, the writings of Karl Marx, he had a passionate over there. So he was a Marxist, basically. Right. So due to some sensitive manner, right, basically he was challenging the fascist notions, right. Fascist, try to Google what is fascist, right. It's also very much, fascism is the idea that the country has to be ruled by a single ethnicity, right, similarly to Adolf Hitler at that point of time, right? We still have a lot of fascists around here, right? For instance, the current Brazil president, right, Bolsonaro, right? He's a fascist, person, right? As a leader, he's very fascist, right? It's the idea of ethnic superiority, and so on and so forth. Right, you can also look into other examples. So in during this time, this I think World War II, right? The collaboration was between Italy, Japan, and German, right? So Mussolini and Hitler shared a similar ideology anyway, right? So Gramsci was challenging, right? His writings, his thinking at that point of time was challenging this fascist thinking, and obviously Mussolini himself, right? Later he was incarcerated, right, in prison for almost 20 years, right? Almost 20 to 22 years he was imprisoned because in verbatim, right, quote unquote, Mussolini himself said this brain has to be stopped from working for at least 20 years because Gramsci's oratory skill and also his thinking was very radical that could destabilize the power of Mussolini himself. Right. So hegemony itself is a political or cultural dominance or authority over others. Right. We can say hegemony in family, for instance. Maybe your father or your mother is the only powerful person in your family, right, making all the decisions and so on. Could be called as hegemony themselves. Like in Malaysia, the bigger political scenario, right? If you have seen right now, normally the ruling party will try to retain its political hegemony, right, to retain its power, right. As I'm recording today, right, the current happening is that we changed the parliament has just had its parliament sitting, and then the speaker was changed, right, with a lot of complications, right. For the first time in history that we are changing a speaker, what do you call it, a speaker without any basis, right? What does it indicate? Right? Basically, the ruling regime, the ruling elites are trying to strengthen their position, right? These are all steps taken to strengthen their position and power itself, right? Raymond Willis, right, a culturalist, right, a cultural theorist, right, point out that hegemony constitutes lived experience, right, what we experience as a human being, right. It exceeds ideology, right, not particularly ideology itself, right. It could be about retaining power and so on, right. Lived hegemony is a process, not a system or structure, right. It's a process that takes a long time, right, whether through coercion, right, or changing your mindset, right. It's dynamic, it's always changing, and attempts to neutralize opposition, right, to winning over the opposition through various means, right. We'll look into, like we spoke of when we spoke about Althusser's ideological state apparatus, right, and repressive state apparatus and all those things, right, are means to neutralize and also silence the opposition, right. Gramsci defines hegemony as a form of control exercised by a dominant class in the Marxist sense of a group controlling the means of production. Right. Here, a group of people, normally let's say in the concept of political structure here, now currently the Perikatan Nasional is trying to exercise a form of control. That's trying to control the masses to buy into their ideology that they are here to help the people, right? They are here to make sure the economic restructure better, right? Forming better, right? And so on and so forth. Previously, for the past 60 years, UMNO Barisan Nasional was the dominant group in the society politically, right? They were using all kind of means. Were using the media, the mainstream media like TV3, NTV7, Astro, and so on, to make sure that their perspective, their point of view, that only narratives that are being acknowledged by them being disseminated to the people, right? Using these mass mediums to control the mind of the people and also to influence them, to co-opt their mind that they believe that they are here to do good things, right? These are good people who are here to do good things, right? For Gramsci, the dominant class at the moment is defined as bourgeois who owns the means of production, while the proletariat having no means of production of their own. being exploited by the bourgeois. Right here, remember the context is in early 1920s, right? Early 1920s up to 1940s, right? 1940, right? At the 30s, right? At the time where industrialization is still happening, right? Means of production is those who have like factories, right? Capital, right? Who owns the means of production, right? They have the money to introduce new things in the market, right? To buy the labor and so on, right? Those who don't have means of production, those who don't have any means of production, are the proletariat, like you and me, the working class, right? The working class are the proletariats who are exploited by the bourgeoisie, the capital classes in the society, by selling their labor power. Like me, I'm selling my labor power, right? I'm using my knowledge as what the knowledge that I've gained through educational institutions, right? Tertiary educations. Now I'm selling those knowledges in order to receive a sort of remuneration, so be able to live, getting my food, right? A house to live, and so on and so forth, right? So the ruling class capitalist forms and maintains its hegemony in civil society, where hegemony is exercised by ruling class over allied classes and social group, right? Working class, right? Can be divided into two levels. First level through military force is more repressive, as what I say as coercion. Second is ideology, which is slowly and takes time, right? Which is creating consent, right? Co-opting them into your to make sure they would buy your ideology, right? Civil society is basically the society that we are living in, right? We are civil society. You and me are the members of civil society, right? There are civil society organizations, right? NGOs, right? Where they perform functions. Their function is to be the voice of the people, right? To be the check and balance, right? Of watchdog and so on. Right? Other includes coercion and consent, right? As I said earlier. Right? So international communication, notion of hegemony widely used to conceptualize political functions of the mass media as a key player in propagating and maintaining the dominant ideology, and also to explain the process of media and communication production with dominant ideology, shaping production of news and entertainment, right? As I said earlier, right, here in communication studies, right, we look how mass media plays a role in maintaining, right, and disseminating dominant ideology. Not necessarily has to be political ideology. It could be like gender, patriarchy, about wages, right? About the role of education, right? What kind of education that we should receive, about language, right? All kind of ideology normally is to maintain dominant ideology. And then we have, according to Gramsci, we have relative autonomy, right? Some kind of freedom, right? A limited freedom to bargain or negotiate or to put forward contrasting ideologies, right? That is the success that we are seeing today, where women have been breaking the ceilings, right? Entering into the domain of working domain, right? Previously, they are not allowed. In Hinduism, there's a culture where previously, about 100 years ago, right? If you are a widow, right, when your husband has died, the woman is burnt along with the corpse of the husband, right? Calling it as a suti practice, right? You can Google for suti practice, right? It is a patriarchal ideology, right? Of course, they were using mass media, right, to propagate them, but it was continuing. It was maintained and reinforced and continued and passed to different generation in the family, right? Here, family and religious institution was instrumental in keeping that ideology to be in practice, right? But however, that was later banished by the British ruling when they were ruling India at that moment. Right. Crisis hegemony happened when there's a counter hegemony, such as demonstration, where the ruling class loses the concern of the masses. When they say mobilize large subordinate classes against the ruling class. Right. The ruling class will always try to sort out solution by silencing the opposition in order to maintain their hegemony. Right. For example, in Malaysia, we have seen many mass demonstration, and also not necessarily has to be a lot of demonstration, protest against the state, against the government, ruling government. If you remember, you can look for Percy, right, an example, right? And then there was Tangkap MO1, but Mansukan PT and rally, minimum wage, and so on and so forth, right? Because the people are not satisfied with their way of life, right? They are still in poverty, or maybe they are discriminated because of their ethnicity and so on, right? Despite, for example, I'll give you an example. In Penang, despite of claiming that it's, despite of its status of being a developed city, right, in Malaysia, it's still practicing subtle racism, right? If you look for housing rentals, right, room rentals, right, I personally had a lot of problems, right? It's always prefer Chinese or prefer Malays, right? Then what happens to Indians? What about the other ethnicity that are living in Malaysia, right? So these are all subtle racism, right? So when there's a there are demonstrations to protest, right, to voice out their dissent against the ruling classes. In France, right, like last year or 2 years back, there was a massive protest, right, against the president, against the ruling government. And then in Hong Kong, right, Hong Kong against the mainland China, right, they are saying that they are basically occupying Hong Kong, right, rather than giving them an autonomy, right? So if this kind of things happens, right, ruling class will always try to look for other opportunities, other tactics to silence them, whether it's through long imprisonment, by using laws, right, silencing them, or in certain countries there are killings to happen, right? They are abducted, right, and then later disappear. In Cambodia, if you are a dissent, right, there's a high possibility where you disappear without any traces, right? It happens, right? For Gramsci, he did not see people, even poor people, as helpless victims of hegemony, as idiotic robot. Rather, he believed that people have the freedom and power to struggle against ideology to alter hegemony, which is true, the relative autonomy that I've said before, right? He believed that, Gramsci has also used that people are organic intellectual. No one is idiot, right? No one is stupid, which means it not necessarily has to be educated in formal educational settings, right? They are basically an intellect of their own, right? If let's say a mechanic, right, would you call him? Maybe you would call him uneducated, but not necessarily a person with zero knowledge, right? He is he or she is knowledgeable about the thing that he's doing, right? About his work, mechanic, about car, about bikes, whatever, automobiles and so on, right? So he believes that people are not helpless, right? They are not like what the early Marxists say, that when you control the economy, the people automatically believe whatever what the person who owns the economic base would be ruling the ideology of the masses, right? So here Gramsci denounced that, right? So here the counter-hegemony were always facing the greatest challenge in changing the system in society, because the power of ruling class have always been proven to be more powerful, right? Because one, you are fighting against the ruling regime who are equipped with a lot of assets, right, with a lot of apparatus, right? For instance, the police force, the law system, the judicial system, and then what else? Maybe gangsters, right? Tycoons, gangsters, right? And then what else? They can strip off you from your, they can make you disappear, and so on and so forth, right? They are more powerful, basically, right? Unless you group yourself. That's why every time when there's a fight against the powerful one, you always have to go in masses, right? That's why we organize mass demonstration, right? To make sure your voices are heard and you are not hurt, right? You are not what you call persecuted and so on, right? So violent solutions are possible, right? Like revolution, right? And like armed struggle that happened in Cuba, and then later in where else? In early Bolshevik revolution in Russia and so on and so forth, right? So media and hegemony, right? According to Gramsci and also the theoretical perspective, right? Media is a powerful ideological control and leadership, right? So every time when there's a hegemony crisis, media which are under control will be used as a tool to solve the problem of the hegemony of the powerful ruling. Which means, on contrary, media also can play as a counter-hegemonic tool, right? If I, a person who's against the ruling government, for example, right, I can use my own media, right? Now you can have your Facebook postings, right? Your Twitter, your Instagram to voice out if you have dissatisfaction against the ruling regime or the whatever, right? What kind of whatever ideology, right? So, but normally media is used as a state apparatus by the ruling government, right? To maintain their power and also to silence the critics. Right, so diverse culture can be ruled or dominated by one group or class. Their everyday practices and shared beliefs provide the foundation for complex systems of domination. Ruling class forms and maintains its hegemony in civil society, where hegemony is exercised. Right, this is just a repetition. We'll see. The values of the bourgeoisie became the common sense values of all. For example, right, being moral, right, being moral, being disciplined, is always associated with the upper class because it is their way of living, their lifestyle is what disseminated as common sense, right? If you look into television and then you saw that people are the way they drink their tea, right, is very British for that sense, right? Because British have this culture of having tea time. It's a compulsory, right? And then the way that they mix their tea is very the etiquette is totally different. Then you would think that this is what or this is how you should drink a tea, right? Not necessarily it has to be our way of drinking tea, right? Using hands to eat, for example, right? Or using if you are a law graduate in the Western world, right? I think it is in London, right? You would go for training, right? They would train you to use different set of cutleries. I think it's about 13 different sets of cutleries to dine in the bar, right? Bar in the sense that you will be called to the bar, right? So you have to be able to use a different set of cutleries for different set of foods, right? Without mixing them and so on. That is called as common sense, a culture, right? That is the dominant culture. Right, so working class identify their own good with the good of the bourgeoisie, right? Maybe if the bourgeoisie says that, right, not revolting, right, not questioning is the way of life, right, and then it is highly propagated, then I would buy that. Okay, as a person, this is my role in the society, right? Maybe you're the bourgeoisie using the religious institution they have used, right? And to say that your role in this life is to serve the rich people, right? And then because of your past sins and so on, right? Then you would there are chances for you to believe and do your or justify your role in the society, right? Rather than questioning, right? So it creates a consent from yourself to abide whatever the dominant ideology says. Similarly, how it is applied in patriarchy and so on, right? So suggested maintained control not just through violence and political and economic coercion, but also a combination of coercion and consent that keep the powerful people in power, right? Where you're seeking consent by disseminating the ideologies. You target the mind rather than inducing fear. So media become very powerful in terms of ideological control and leadership. Could we say that media has become the dominant class in the Western society, full of symbiotic and hegemonic traits, right? So in Malaysia, some of hegemony crisis crisis that happened is May 13 incident, right, in 1969. And after that, a lot of people were arrested and the opposition, right, the opposition was also wiped out. And then 1987, Operasi Lalang by the infamous Operasi Lalang by Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, right, during his first tenure as the Prime Minister, right, he silenced almost every critic in Malaysia. All the opposition political parties, newspapers were banned, suspended, right? A lot of activists, a lot of politicians were detained and so on and so forth, right? Anwar's Reformasi movement in 1999, right? Similarly, Anwar was arrested under Sudomi and also briefly for ISA, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then the birth of Reformasi movement, and then Parti Keadilan Rakyat, okay, so Parti Keadilan Nasional came into picture, right? Challenging Mahathir and so on, right? And then 2008, the first political tsunami where 5 states fell to the opposition, the then opposition, right? Unprecedented, right? And then the Hindraf movement in 2005, in 2007, 2005 or 2007, right? They had a huge rally in Kuala Lumpur, right? Green Assembly, right? Anti-liners assembly rally, and then Bersih, obviously, right? So, May 13, a brief background is the implementation of new economy. It is said that, if you look into the 1969, after the racial riot, right, the then government, right, under the leadership of Tun Abdul Razak, they formulated the new economic policy, right, to say, because they had this findings that says that the reason for May 13 was the growing economic disparity between the rural and the urban, the rural Malays and the Chinese urbans who were dominating the towns, right? So this was the argument that was used to formulate NEP. But the NEP itself was, although it has a very noble intention, right? It was very the objective was to reduce poverty and also reduce poverty among Malays and also among the rurals and so on, right? To create more opportunities and so on, right? But at that point of time, right, during May 13, a lot of local presses were started. Mageran came into control, right, which means it had direct. I think emergency was declared as well. So the country was under the control of the Prime Minister himself, Tun Abdul Razak, who was also the chairperson of Mageran, the chief of Mageran as well, Majlis Gerakan Negara or something. Right. It's a rising in media society, but the freedom of reporting had been tightened by the ownership through, right, through laws and so on. Right. So Operasi Lalang in 1987, similarly, right, ISA was used to detain almost 106 people, 106%. Carried down by police, right? A lot of late night arrests, detained. They were all detained. Many people were detained for many years, right? Because ISA, if you read about ISA, then you'll know why it is very arbitrary, right? The Home Minister has the power to extend the remand for another 60 days. They can renew without bringing you to court, right? And then the license of these publications were revoked and suspended and so on, right? These were some of the causes. And then although most of the detainees were released either conditionally or unconditionally, 40 were issued detention order for 2 years. Included were many people, right? Lim Kit Siang, Lim Guan Eng, Dr. Nasir, who else? Not Anwar. Can't remember some of the names, right? But Muhammad Sabu, right? A lot of people were arrested, right? And then printing presses and publication was amended, which means they're giving a lot of power for the home ministry, which means the ruling government, right? If you have anything sensitive or challenging or criticizing the government, then your license could be revoked, or you can be banned or incarcerated. This was the fear that was induced. What in the Gramscian term, right, of hegemony, we say that you create fear among the people that if you are challenging my power, you can be arrested for a number of years, right, without any limit, right? So, and then Reformasi movement, right, was the sacking of Anwar Ibrahim, and then he was detained under ISA, right? The sacking began when status view on governance that conflicted with the then Prime Minister, right? He was openly criticizing Mahathir, the way he handled the economic crisis over that period, and also some other nepotism, right? And conflict of interest and so on, right? So then Mahathir sacked him and then got him arrested for, although Mahathir has declined that he didn't play any role, but it is an open book, right, to understand why Anwar was detained, right? So that happened, like you can read about all of this, right, much detail, right? The Reformasi movement at that point also garnered a lot of support for Anwar Ibrahim. A lot of mass protests were taking place, right, for many days, I think for about a week, right? And then later he was arrested, and then before you get into you can see some footages where police reacted brutally against the protesters, right? Kicking them with boots, right? Grouping up to 4 to 5 people and what you call bashing 1 or 2%, right? You can see the videos in YouTube. I think they are documented. And by analysis, the purpose of Anwar's arrest was to cover up the many billions of ringgit that UMNO had taken to benefit a few people, right? You can read this book, Mahathir, the Hegemony of Mahathir or something. The media provided very little coverage of Anwar's arrest, unusual because Anwar was then the deputy prime minister, right? Even if it was reported, right, it was biased against or prejudice against Anwar, right? This also brings to the birth of Malaysia Kini, right? In 1999, because there was no any mainstream media was coming up with news that presents the perspective of Anwar or Anwar's family, so Anwar's supporters. Right, so came in Malaysia Kini at that point of time, right, as the first ever independent blog, that internet news portal that tries to what we call as an alternative media, right, a counter hegemonic tool, right. Here, this is the famous what we call the black eye incident of Anwar, right? The IGP whacked Anwar and he had a black eye, right? And then the media was stopped from reporting the issue. But however, it was later got hyped up, right? Mahathir was questioned and so on. As always, Mahathir has denied everything, right? And then this is the 2000 protest by Hindraf, right? About basically asking for reparation, right? From British embassy for bringing them to Malaya under the colonial practice and so on, right? They were basically it was the long suppressed voices of marginalization, right? Claiming that claiming that the Indians were left out in the national progress, right? Their economic concerns were not addressed, and so on and so forth, right? These are the concerns that led to the Hindraf protests. Instead of portraying a balanced reporting, right? The news report focused on how UMNO Malays had tolerated the non-Bumi by practicing power sharing and allowing religious freedom. This is the ideology that the mainstream media are trying to disseminate, right? Of course, under the ownership and under the dominance of the ruling elites, right? So here, when I read the news, I would feel that, although UMNO has done all this thing, although the Malays have giving a lot of space for them to be in Malaysia and so on, but they are not being grateful, right? Similarly, how the in today's time and period, right, you can see similar kind of ideology are being eschewed in eschewed against the refugees and so on, right? That we are tolerating them, they should be very grateful and so on and so forth, right? Indian community or the non-Bhumika trust were painted as disrespectful towards the social contract, having no sense of gratitude to the Malays or government, not showing loyalty both in king and country. Right? This was the flavor that was used to write in the media. Bersih also faced similar problems, right? They were when they were vindicated. They were portrayed as pengkhianat negara, betrayers, right? They were trying to overthrow the government, right? And then the yellow color was later banned during Bersih 4, if I'm not mistaken. The yellow color was banned, and then Bersih 2 was Bersih 2.0, I think. A lot of crackdown was happening. What else? A lot of crackdown in the sense that a lot of activists that were involved in organizing Bersih was arrested and so on and so forth, right? Sure, the ruling class will always make sure that the interest and power is maintained, and media has always been the tool for maintaining the hegemony of the ruling class, right? Create a false consciousness to the public, right? Like what Althusser is saying, or what Althusser has been saying, right? False consciousness, saying that, for instance, like in the yellow Bersih rally is trying to overthrow the government, overthrow the king, right? False consciousness, right? So conclusion, right? Process of hegemony occurs in many ways, right? One is ideological state apparatus and the repressive state apparatus, right? One is repressive state apparatus through coercion. The other one is to seek consent, right? Play within ideology or mindset, right? Repressive and enforced ideology when it's challenged, right? Ideological apparatus reproduce it in the everyday activities of communication by making any particular ideology seem very normal. Example, patriarchal, that woman should be cooking, for instance. This is like reinforced in everyday communication in almost in every family, right? But is it the only way? Is it the right way to say that only woman belongs to the kitchen, right? This kind of questions should be asked, right? Domination of the capital class is achieved by having control of the economy and also politics, right? It's an important concept, right? Read about ideology, see the evolution of ideology from Marx to Althusser, right? The evolution, how it has been conceptualized. It's not permanent because there are two elements of consciousness set by the ruling class and based on everyday expression, right? Experience. You have your own set of belief, you have your own upbringing where you can challenge the dominating ideology being set and distributed by the ruling class, right? Okay, so that would be it. We'll discuss in the tutorial discussion. Thank you.